on there, and when you go on mute, it should be good. Okay, that looks good. Actually, just bear with me one quick moment.
You're on mute. You're going to have to give him a thumbs up.
No, I can hear him.
We can.
And you know what? There's not crazy background noise there. You guys are probably okay. I'm hard to interrupt.
All right, perfect. We'll leave you go. Just let me know if it becomes distracting or anything. We can always put on mute.
Sounds like a plan. Okay. Just one. I do have one distraction. Just one sec. I'm gonna clean my headphones up.
Sure.
Because Mike's profile picture is there, I think that's like him, and he's just in a really
very rigid, that guy.
just intently staring at the.
Yeah. That's someone
As he listens to us.
So handsome. What a guy. My God, what a handsome gentleman.
All right, there we go. Now I'm in better shape. Okay, you guys ready to kick it off? Should we get started?
Sure.
I really, really appreciate you guys inviting me out to talk about React. Not even a chuckle, not even giggle. Was there just a few looks? Was there a few like, wait, are we listening to a talk about React, or is this about Angular or Ember? Like, what framework are we listening to here? Like, what is going on?
Oh, yeah.
So we're going to talk about Angular and beyond, and I have titled this talk Angular and Beyond because when I spoke to Gavin about giving a talk on Angular, I mentioned to him that it had been a few months since I'd built anything in Angular, and that my knowledge might have been out of date. It turns out that wasn't the case. They were on like 1.28. Now they're on 1.31. And I kicked off a little project with Angular a few days ago. So I've reacquainted myself with Angular. And what I hope to show you today isn't just Angular. It's Angular and all the other cool stuff that results in a really efficient front-end development workflow, regardless of what framework you're using. So I'm kind of hoping that you can consider the Angular part of WildStar. We'll talk a lot about Angular today and some things I learned in the course of the projects I've built with Angular, but we'll also talk about the tools surrounding it that make it easy to swap it out for something else, for example. Cool. Any questions there?
No. Good to go.
Awesome. So let me first welcome you to the big bang of front-end web development. I mean, there's just a proliferation of frameworks on the front end. There's probably been, I don't know, 15, 20 frameworks that have spun up and spun back down. There's 3 front runners right now, those being React, Ember, and of course Angular. There's a few others that are on the sidelines. One of the guys from the Angular team left to take on a project called Durandal, which was around before. He has a lot of respect in the community, so we'll see what happens with that project. But really what you're seeing right now is just this crazy, exciting moment in front-end development's history. Like, this is the best place to be on the web right now. I mean, I work at Heroku, obviously, so I spend a lot of time talking about things on the server and server-side architectures, but man, nothing as exciting as the front-end web development. It's so near, it's so dear to my heart. So very, very happy to talk about it. Who am I? I'm Matt Creager. You know what? I usually have this spiel I do, but you know, we're developers, so we don't want to have duplication. And Heather put a post in here that was like, or in the Slack channel about introducing ourselves. So why don't I just answer these questions? Okay, talk to me about software development. I'm passionate about software development. In my free time, you'll find me working on side projects. No, I'm just kidding. I do other things too. I'm an avid reader. I am particularly devastated right now, just to make everybody feel nice and depressed, about the passing of Terry Pratchett. Any Terry Pratchett fans? Discworld fans?
Can't see your hand. Say.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Somebody's raising their hand. Excellent. I missed that. Sorry, what was that?
I added him to my clacks in my header.
Oh, excellent. Yeah. Oh, God. I'm missing Terry Pratchett right now. I actually gave a talk at O'Reilly Software Architecture Conference on 12 factors, and I littered the only illustrations and quotes I had in my deck were Terry Pratchett quotes, and only like 3 or 4 people picked up on it and came over to me after and were like, that was a nice little, sort of in honor of the late, great Sir Terry Pratchett. What am I fascinated by? I'm fascinated by the possibility of Star Trek coming back to the TV. I heard that's a possibility. That's got me pretty excited. That's how geeky I am. What am I learning to do? I'm learning to play the piano because guitar was fun, but piano just looks a lot cooler. Last thing I set out to do and accomplish. Well, actually, that's kind of a good question. I sort of mentioned that when Gavin came to me, I was like, okay, I need to get neck deep in Angular again. So I kind of kicked off a project that relates to this talk that we're going to work on during this talk. So I can't say that it's done yet, but hopefully by the end of the talk, I'll be a lot closer. That's going to be that live coding piece. What do I wish? I wish I could live in San Francisco and still have all of my friends. Free healthcare would be pretty okay too. And maybe the Canadian government as opposed to the US government. But yeah, but San Francisco's fun. I am moved by art because I'm really bad at it. Music, because I'm pretty bad at that too. And what do I live for? I don't know. I haven't even figured that one out myself yet. So there you go. That's me in a nutshell. How did I get into? Look at how sweet this animation is. Come back. This was a good friend of mine did this, Nick Tassone. You're probably seeing that Go Instant logo there being smashed into the Angular logo. Go Instant, obviously founded by Gavin and Jevin, those folks who you guys are probably very familiar with. They really gave me the opportunity to become very familiar with Angular. I was working on a project. How many of you are familiar with Go Instant or Firebase, like that kind of real-time data synchronization API?
Yeah.
Okay, probably everybody, right? Okay. So I was building an integration for Go Instant and Angular that allowed you to use the APIs that Go Instant supplied from very naturally from within your Angular application. And at the time, like Angular was fairly new, and this was like a real problem for two reasons. And these problems really haven't gone away. One, because real-time on the web was very new then, is still pretty new now. And two, because when you mix a standard model, a model that's based on a RESTful API, and anything real-time, just bad things happen. You know, people aren't used to those two things combining because they sort of do the oil and water thing. So this framework really solved a lot of those problems and was the inspiration for a lot of what you'd use now in Firebase. And what's their one called? Angular Fire? Yeah, Angular Fire. There's an interesting story about the Angular Fire library that I'm sure one of the Go Instant guys will tell you at some point. It involves a code base being copied. Okay, so that's me. I'm boring. But this, I promise you, will be the 25 of the most action-packed minutes of your life. I always I like to really hype it up. It's like Lord of the Rings movies. Everybody tells you they're amazing. You get to them. They're pretty good. They don't quite live up to the hype. I hope my talk does me justice, but it probably will. So first, we're going to move beyond the framework. We're going to rise above that grind. I'm going to talk about what a framework actually is, why they matter, how they fit into the big picture. Then we're going to talk about Angular, the good parts, and some of that other stuff as well. And finally, we'll talk about the two-way data binding, things that go bump in the night. We'll do the thing that every presenter is terribly afraid of, which is live coding, which I just think is the only thing that really matters during a presentation anyway. So, any questions about me and my fascinating history?
How did you get to SoCal? Or I guess NorCal?
So you have Jevin and Gavin to blame for that. When they took Go Instant, and Go Instant the team started to become kind of part of Salesforce and working on this SOS project, which is like a video chat help on your mobile device application, or something you use. It's a library that you integrate into your mobile applications that allows you to have like live chat with an agent that's sold through Salesforce. So when that started to happen, there wasn't a lot of stuff for me to work on at Go Instant, and I'd been spending a lot of time at Heroku. I was interested in it. I was working on all these open source projects, and they invited me to come and help them build a developer advocacy team. And so I flew down on like a Monday. I spent the week here, and on Friday they dropped the bomb on me that they'd like me to move here. And my wife is a Canadian tax accountant, so you can imagine how that went over. Not well. It was like months of convincing. Lots of emotional support from Gavin and Jevin. A couple nights I think I spent at the office. So yeah, it was good times. But we're here, and it's sunny. So there you go. Any other questions there? Did I answer that question? Was that?
Totally. Thanks,
Okay.
man.
So the lesson there is if you can convince your wife and find a decent startup, you're on your way to the sunshine. Okay, so moving beyond the framework, rising above the grind. What is an web application framework? It's dead simple. It's something that's designed to support your web development efforts. It's got to take the overhead associated with the stuff that you do day in, day out when you're building web applications. And whenever I use a framework here, I'm talking front-end framework. It's got to take that overhead, and it's got to eliminate it by automating anything that's automating and giving you glue for the things that you do every day, common tasks. And this is something that surprisingly comes up a lot. Like, where does the framework actually live? Well, you have an API that's going to be, this is like kind of a new thing. Originally, you'd see the framework would be, and this is a nice little plug for Heroku, would be on the same side as your API. Your API, your framework, it's all kinds of the same thing. But we're getting this much cleaner separation now, where you have an API and a framework, and they're communicating. And the framework, that's going to live in the browser, and the API, that's going to live on a server somewhere. So the thing that we're going to focus on today is that framework. But that framework we're going to focus on today is going to be Angular. It doesn't necessarily have to be Angular. It's just a framework. It's running in the browser. It's helping us achieve those common goals. Any questions here? I've got just a little bit of echo, which is not actually all that distracting. I'll just talk quiet a little bit. Yeah, that works. Okay, so what are the space table stakes for frameworks? Like, what do you get by default? Here are the things that, a few of the things that I think are probably most important. Without these, you're really not dealing with a framework. You need an architecture. It has to encourage best practice. MVC, Model View Controller, that's one example. We'll talk about that in a minute. That's the most relevant example because we're talking about Angular, but there's others. There needs to be common idioms, so you're not wasting your time making the same trivial choices over and over again. And this is a point on which a lot of the frameworks pivot. Like Ember tends to consider almost everything a common idiom, from the way that you name your folders to the way that you name your files and your models. And so it uses common idioms for all of that stuff. Whereas Angular creates has less constraints. Templates. Honestly, we're past the days where we put our data directly into our views. We're isolating these things, and then we're using data binding for talking about Angular so that we can connect render our templates out to views and then connect them to our models, which I've got some illustrations that'll make that pretty clear in a sec. Caching. If you're going to fetch the same thing twice, you're just wasting one fetch. So you fetch the same thing twice and only one of those makes a network call. That's something that's traditionally taken care of for you by the framework. And then routing. Like, we need a way for our users to navigate our web applications. And usually there's a ton of boilerplate in routing. So routing is kind of a key thing that's included in a lot of frameworks. So those are kind of the table stakes right now. Those are the things you get regardless of which framework you pick. There's tools that can make these things happen. So is there any questions about just frameworks in general, kind of high level?
No. I had one question. I was just wondering, are we going to be able to see this presentation after you're done? I'm just wondering if I should start taking notes or not.
No, don't bother. You'll see. It'll all be online. You can just rip through. I tend to fly through slides pretty quickly. Don't worry about taking notes. You can download it. It'll be in my repository. My repo.
Okay, thanks.
Maybe I should have said yes so that you paid and then you'd just be struggling the whole time to keep up with my mad clicking. I don't know how you do it. You'd need to get your camera out and just take pictures of every slide. Okay, so what sets Angular apart? What makes Angular different than the other frameworks that are out there? There's a few key kind of core things. And I have stacked these so they go from least exciting to possibly most exciting. So we all love test-driven development. Are you guys familiar, guys and gals, familiar with the concept of test-driven development?
Somewhat.
Is anyone practicing the dark art of test-driven development today?
We're not.
I don't think so. No.
I'm hoping to.
We're all hoping to, let me tell you. We all wish we could do test-driven development on a regular basis, but it really comes down to your tooling. How good is your tooling? How easy does it make it? Because we're developers. We're lazy. We're gonna take the path of least resistance when it comes to development. And so without good tools, we're unlikely to adhere to best practices like test-driven development. So this is something that I think arguably is easiest with Angular. Angular is built from the ground up to be easy to test. React's giving it a good run for its money, but it doesn't have anywhere near the maturity in the tooling. Karma is a tool that allows you to run end-to-end, write and run end-to-end tests with Angular. It's dead simple to set up, it's dead simple to use, and it's easy to automate, so you can make it kind of part of your workflow. So Karma is a strong point, a strong asset of Angular. Believe it or not, even the MVC architecture is a real asset to the Angular framework. A lot of people, regardless of where in software development they're coming from, whether it's the server and frameworks or mobile development, they kind of get the concept of MVC, Model View Controller. This was a concept that was introduced in '76, so it's ancient. Sorry to anybody that was born before '76. It basically just takes your software application and divides it up into 3 interconnected parts, Model View Controller, creating this clean separation of concerns between what's being presented and how your data is managed. And first and foremost, it's a software pattern for implementing user interfaces. That's why it makes so much sense to have it running in the browser rather than on the server. So this is kind of what it looks like and how it breaks down. Your user is going to interact with the view. That is what your user is seeing. It's what that's where all of their interactions are being tracked. Those interactions are going to push changes to your model. That's what your application is all about. That's where your application state is stored. Your model should be the ultimate source of truth. This is especially important on the client where you're not directly interacting with a database, and so many of your calls are going to be async, AJAX, over the wire. So your model really needs to be the ultimate source of truth for your view on the client, not necessarily like everywhere else. And then you've got your controller, and this is just what your application does. It's your application's behavior. It's your business logic. Any questions about MVC? How familiar are you guys with MVC?
We've been looking at it for a couple of weeks.
Okay, so you're bored of it already. I get it. Okay. So one of the other things that makes Angular so cool, one of its claims to fame early on, was data binding. Data binding is just the automatic synchronization between that model and that view. I've got a better slide here. So your template is going to be compiled into a view. And that view that's what your user is interacting with. Whenever they make a change to your view, they type something in an input. That is going to automatically be synchronized to your model. And vice versa, your model might take in some input from a server or API, and that will automatically drive a change to your view. So you might notice here I put Darby Dragons. Two-way data binding has emerged as an anti-pattern, in my opinion. I've kind of been preaching this for the last couple of years. I think it's especially true now that Flux, with the React framework, this kind of like this concept of a unidirectional data flow, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. You just don't need it most of the time. Usually you have some type of user action that can drive a change, and it's hard to reason about things being automatically synchronized in 2 directions. So I advise against it. But that doesn't mean that data binding is not useful. Data binding is totally useful. When your model changes, your view should totally change. And when your view changes, someone should know about it. So Angular is plain old JavaScript. You know, if I was to show you a class in Ember, it would be lengthy. But in JavaScript, it's just a plain old JavaScript object. So there's nothing really to learn or know. It isn't plain old HTML, though. They enhance HTML. HTML, or your DOM, is your view layer. And we treat it as a view layer. And we teach it a few new tricks using Angular's directives. You can see UI view here. That's a directive. And I'll show you what that does in a few minutes. But it's basically, directives are the way that we teach the DOM new tricks, things that we can access from our controllers, use from our controllers. Any questions about any of this stuff?
No.
Cool. Nobody's picking up on the fact that this doesn't look like plain old JavaScript.
I don't think we've got enough experience with plain old JavaScript to tell when something isn't.
You know what? I'm gonna redefine what plain old JavaScript is for you. Then we're gonna start on a brand new page with a brand new version of JavaScript, and that will set you guys up for total success in the future. So what does all this stuff add up to? This stuff just adds up to less boilerplate. I mean, that's what you want to do. You want to spend less time writing code, more time thinking about it. And so dramatically less boilerplate, that's a huge win. When I first gave a talk on Angular, it was, I don't know, what, year and a half or something ago. The 25,000 was from last January, and I was like stunned when I went to update this slide, and I realized that there was 87,000 questions now on Stack Overflow. I mean, that just kind of speaks to how popular a framework is, and it speaks to how huge the community around Angular is. And I give this advice over and over and over. The community is the open source project. Don't go into an open source project without first checking out the community. Get on IRC, just find out whether these are people that you can work with, people you can talk to, people that you can go to for help. If you don't like the community, then it doesn't matter if the framework's amazing, because when you want help, it's not going to be there, you're going to be frustrated, and you're going to go and look somewhere else. So any open source project you're looking at, I strongly encourage you to evaluate the community first. It's like the last thing everybody does, when really it should be the first thing everybody does. They just had their second conference. It was very recent, just March 5th and 6th. I think there's kind of this idea with some conferences where like there's not a lot of value in them unless you're there. But honestly, with ngconf, that's not the case. All of the sessions are recorded. They're all available on YouTube, and they are by far the most recent and relevant resource for you. I try to keep this deck like short, concise, open it up for questions, simply because duplicating all of these slides wouldn't make any sense. Sorry, duplicating all these talks. Duplicating all of the slides wouldn't make any sense either, though. And then my favorite thing about Angular, like I feel like it's the deck Bruce Lee would use if he was a developer and he was still alive, because it allows you to take what you like about the framework, get rid of the stuff that you're not interested in, and remix it, make it uniquely your own. Now, that's not to say there isn't best practices. That's not to say that you maybe shouldn't be on the rails for a little while initially. But when you're ready to break free of those rails, or you need to because you want to get something done and the framework's getting in your way, it's easy to push Angular out of the way. It's built by Google, so I mean, like +1, right? It's that's Google's thing, +1. I mean, if you can, this slide was actually kind of funny when there was no competition, but now said no one ever doesn't really make sense because Facebook and Yehuda Cats have introduced compelling alternatives. But regardless, the fact that it's being built by Google and the team, and I mean like literally sits down the hallway from the people that are working on the V8 engine, which is the engine that in the browser processes all your JavaScript. So if you optimize the V8 engine, then your framework is gonna be fast. They have a complaint, they can literally like walk down, and they do literally walk down the hallway and throw shit at them. So, made by Google, good thing. This was the popularity comparatively in 2014. There's really no point in me telling you what those other lines are because they're not even. I mean, they're not even on the map. And I was surprised to see that. I don't know why I went back to 2005 here. Oh dear. But yeah, I mean, 2015, it's continuing to go up. Like, and I just dropped the other lines because now on this scale, they just basically disappear. I think this has a lot to do with enterprise adoption. Angular's really taken off in enterprise, and I feel like those people search more than anybody else does. So there you go. Any questions about any of the, why you might want to be using Angular? What makes it different?
Matt, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, sweet.
I can hear you.
Okay, sweet. I was wondering, so the model and the views, I kind of get how the sorry, I'm echoing a lot. The data binding work. But where do I define it? Would that be somewhere in like a service or in the controller? Or is that just like, because it just seems like it chills out on the HTML?
So if you're, so I guess the best way to look at that is your model is, like, Angular doesn't force you to define your model in any one way. You could put it in the controller, and that wouldn't necessarily be the wrong place for it. It'd be the easiest place to put it, and it would have direct access to scope, or in this case, the DOM. But that doesn't necessarily mean you should put it there, because a lot of the time a model is going to be shared amongst a large number of controllers. And if your model is shared amongst a large number of controllers, and it needs to be the single source of truth, then you want to manage that independently. You want to basically create an API for your model and bring that in as a service, and then access it via your controller. And what you're seeing in your views, those tags, the ngbind or whichever one you're using, that's just where you're saying, okay, this item on scope relates directly to my model. So it's just plain old JavaScript, and that JavaScript might be passed down from a service to the controller, from the controller to scope.
Okay, and then earlier you were saying about caching. And so if I call to my API in a service, and then I use it like in 3 different controllers, am I calling 3 times to the API, or am I only calling one service?
That would depend on how you've actually written that model.
Okay.
But a service does act like a singleton, so it's only instantiated once. So if you did it in your constructor, then it would only have occurred once. But it's also possible that you're calling it as a method each time. And if that's the case, I mean, if you put a console.log on there and you move around your application and you see that log pop up over and over, then you know that it's not being instantiated once, it's being called over and over. Okay. And the simplest way to cache data is to just put it in memory. So you go and say, hey, if the result of this query is already available, then don't do the query again. Return the current result.
All right. Sweet. Thank you.
No sweat. Okay. Any other questions there?
No, I think we're good here too.
Okay. So I want to point something out. Almost everything I'm going to show you is going to be probably just a little bit over your head. That's okay because you haven't seen it before. But my goal here, to be honest with you, isn't really to just teach you Angular. I'm going to answer your question, so hopefully that's really helpful. But I just want to show you what's out there so you kind of have this awareness, and you can find these things for yourself and pull them all together. That's what I think is almost more important. I want to inspire you to explore and to connect these dots so you can kind of develop these workflows, the workflows that work for you. So in that vein, I'm not going to bore you with slide after slide of code. I hate seeing code in slides. Why are we putting codes in slides? It always helps to see how it's written, the order in which it's written, where it's put. So that's why I'm going to ditch the deck right now. Now, this usually scares the shit out of most presenters because live coding never goes right, but whatever. I'm hoping you guys will forgive me if it all goes down the tubes. So can you guys see Sublime okay here? Do I need to blow it up anymore, or is it kind of is it easy to see, easy to consume?
Carol was talking that it's
Nope, that looks good.
Okay. So this looks kind of different than what you might expect if you were looking at a regular app.js. Now this is the entry point to our application. It's included in our index.html, which I'm sure you guys are pretty familiar with at this point, right at the bottom here. Anyone, for absolutely no good reason or value at all, want to tell me why I include my scripts at the bottom right before my body tag?
Anybody know why?
So we don't delay the loading of the page.
Boom, got it in one. That's exactly it. Especially when, you know, this bundle.js, like, let's have a look at this beast. I mean, it's a big file now. Cool, exciting things are happening in HTTP 2, which is coming pretty soon. They just finished the last spec for that, and we'll be able to load files in a more modular fashion. But until then, we're stuck putting it all in one file. So there's our bundle.js. Now it's called bundle.js because it has more than one file in it. It's all of my dependencies bundled up into one file. And the way that I achieve that is using a tool called Gulp. Anyone familiar with Gulp?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Perfect. So I'm using Gulp to automate my workflow. And the way that I like to break my Gulp tasks out, actually, let's just look at the directory structure here a little bit. First, let's look at what Angular prescribes. So this is the best practice recommendations for Angular app structure. And it tells us that we should subdivide into components and subsections, and here's a little example. The one thing I would like draw your attention to here is everything is top level. I don't know why, but there was this tendency to bury things in folders, like I guess a little bit OCD, like to get everything nice and organized. There was also a tendency to say group all the models together, group all the controllers together, group all the services together. That, as it turns out, is very difficult to build tooling around. So now this new approach is bring everything up to the highest level you can, where it makes sense, and do everything by function. So components, these are things that you're going to reuse, and one component might have your controller and your model and all the other bits and pieces in it. So you'll see in my directory structure, that's pretty much what we have. We have shared stuff, and then instead of components, I've got talks, which brings me to our little project for this afternoon. So this is the talk that we're going through right now. This is the deck that we're working on, and I'm in an unfortunate position where I end up putting a lot of decks together, and I find myself like doing the same thing over and over again. I start a new project, I set it all up, and I end up, creating a new theme for it each and every time. And I was like, well, how cool would it be if all I had to do was add a folder, add a theme, and everything else just took care of itself? And I am reasonably confident that within the next 15, 20, 25, 2 hours, we can accomplish that together using Angular. So I have kind of set us up for success, and these are the tools that I use every time I build an application, regardless of what framework I'm using. I use Gulp to automate the workflow. I use Babel because I want to use, as it says, the next generation of JavaScript today. And if you have a good build tool, then that's really easy to do. And it means that when Angular 2.0, which I don't want to talk too much about because it's not relevant today, but when that launches or when that lands, it's all in ES6. So if you want to ease your transition to Angular 2, then Babel is the way to go. We're using in tons of production apps today. It is totally ready to go. I'm using Browserify because, anyone familiar with Browserify?
No.
Oh, okay, perfect. That's great because minds are going to be blown by Browserify. Is anyone familiar with Node?
Yes.
Okay, great. So how do you feel about the way that Node's dependency manager works? You have a package.json, you put a require in, and boom, away you go.
Yeah.
Pretty great.
Pretty good, right? Like that's a pretty nice workflow. It sucks that we don't have that workflow on the client. There's a couple of tools you can use that will replicate that workflow for you. Browserify is arguably the simplest. It's the most opinionated. There's another one called Webpack that might be worth checking out, but I'm particularly fond of Browserify. And then, of course, like if you're still wearing down your Command R, your refresh buttons, then check out Browser Sync. Browser Sync just means that if I pull this over here and we're looking at this page, collapse that, what's this thing called, snooze or something? Yeah, snoring. And I go, I'm just going to change the background to black, and it just happens. And it doesn't refresh the page, it literally just changes out the CSS, or the HTML in this case. So strongly recommend you check out Gulp, Babel, Browserify. This is the Angular and beyond. These are all the things that you use to make your life so much easier when you're building applications with Angular. Okay, I'm going to close these because you're going to get in my way now. Oh, we'll probably need that one. All right. So any questions about like any of the tooling or the application structure, the structure of the folders, like the kind of the bare bones of the application? Or specifically like what we're working on, what we're building, that sort of thing?
So you said, Matt, that best practice is to take things out of the controllers and services folders and put them in the.
Sorry. You broke up a little bit there. Sorry, just say it one more time.
So your organization, your I don't know, your files.
So rather than have like at this top level, the way that you would have originally done this, you'd have like a top folder which might be lib, and then you do like another one here which would be models, and you do another one here which would be like, you get where I'm going with this, directives. that's kind of fallen out of fashion, almost entirely because, well, for two reasons. One, because of tooling, because it's difficult. You can't recurse through because everything doesn't follow the same pattern, have the same structure, so it's hard to build tooling around. And second, because that's really not how we work. Like, we tend to work on a component at a time. If you think about how naturally this idea of talks as a component fits in, I can package everything up into a specific talk. That's one component, and I can create a second talk. That's another component. It's completely isolated and has everything relevant to that talk in that folder. And I mean, you could picture components being things like login, things like your menu, your navigation. These things would probably be shared. And then you've got things that are like unique to each page. Those would be components.
So it's using something that looks more like our object with sort of the controllers and services and constructors all grouped together for the object that we're looking at.
Yeah, like there's a couple of good examples here. So this is the public PhoneCat app before. So you can see that, like we kind of talked about, it has a JS thing with controllers, directives, filters. And then here's what it looks like as components. So it's got like a checkmark filter. And like a component doesn't necessarily have to even include a view. It could just be something that you need everywhere in your application. It's got this PhoneCat. I have no idea what this PhoneCat component does, but it does stuff, and it's got a couple of different service. And you can see that like they're even keeping the tests. Like the naming conventions even go down to the point of the test. So the tests are with the components now, rather than the old game of like search for the test that's relevant for that specific thing that you've been working on, or figure out where you need to go and put the new test for the new thing that you've just added. It's like chasing your tail. These are things that engineering teams very commonly do. So this is kind of resolving a lot of those issues. And it's bringing everything to the top level. That's kind of the more, honestly, the thing that makes the bigger difference. It doesn't look like they're at the top level in my application because I have this app folder, but that's just because of all the tooling and stuff we need these days. I mean, we've got end-to-end tests. Those are the entire application. Bin, that's the old school name for an executable. So, I mean, really the app is the only, all the things that are relevant, oh God, here we go. All the things that are relevant to the app are really stored inside this app folder, and inside of this app folder, everything's top level. Like the app.js, which is the entry, app.scss, which is the entry point in SCSS, which is compiled down to bundle.css, index.html, like the views aren't buried anywhere. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm glad. I feel like I beat that horse to death effectively now. So, okay. You guys are like surprisingly advanced. I never get questions this good when I'm doing an intro. The intro is normally like, what does ng bind do? Like that's kind of normally where the questions go. But you guys have great questions, so high five. Okay. So let's start with our entry point here. And maybe this stuff's going to be too basic, and we need to like ramp up the complexity a little bit. And if that's the case, we could always do that. But hopefully enough of this ES6 stuff is going to look like cool and new that you'll stay engaged. Okay. So I'm not a big fan of putting things into script tags and stuff. That's a big waste of time. So you can see here I'm just able to import Angular from the Angular module. And what else are we going to use? Who's using UI Router right now?
We did, and I am.
We did.
We've used it before.
You've used it before. Okay. I would strongly encourage you to stick with UI Router. I mean, it's not without its rough edges, but it is a huge upgrade to the built-in location service. And I mean, to the extent that the Angular core team has actually pulled the router out, so it's not even shipped with it anymore. So I'd roll with UI Router if I was you. We'll leave this here, and we're going to define our first constant, because it's always fun to do cool stuff in ES6. And we'll give our module a name. We'll call it talk track. You also might notice that I'm don't have any safety nets here. I'm programming JavaScript without safety nets. I don't even have any. Semicolons at the end of my line. That's because there's a new library that's come out called Standard, which I strongly encourage you to check out. If you can install it globally, and if you do, and you just type Standard, it will go through and say, hey, look, reveal is defined but not used, new line required. It means you don't have to use like JS. You don't have to use any of the standard means of assessing code quality. It does it all for you, and it has the same defaults that kind of the JavaScript community has agreed upon. It also works in ES6 with Babel, so it's nice when you tie all these things together. So, I mean, right off the bat here, we've created an Angular application. This is like technically all we need, but we might as well create a controller too, otherwise our application is going to be pretty boring. Oh, what should we call this? Well, it's the Angular and Beyond talk, so we might as well call it that. We're going to use scope. Do we need anything else right now? Not so much. Okay, another new thing here. We're using this fat arrow. This just isn't, instead of doing like this or var self equals this all over the place, we don't have to do that anymore. We can just use the fat arrow, and we know what the is everybody familiar with this? Like the concept of this in JavaScript?
Yeah.
Okay, was that a yes?
Yes.
Sweet. Oh, you guys said you weren't familiar enough with JavaScript, but I feel like you guys are pretty savvy JavaScripters. So that's good. So this takes the place of bind and apply. So no more binding to all of things. And let's put something on scope. I don't know, Angular and Beyond. And we'll go over here. And we'll make this the title. So can anyone tell me right off the bat whether this is going to work?
Should. $ scope.
Or should it?
Well, no.
So it's not working.
I haven't given the controller to the.
Yeah.
To do the NG controller.
Yeah, we are missing our controller. We haven't specified a controller. We should probably specify a controller somewhere. We also haven't specified. Well, let's not put it here. Put it here. That's right. Yeah, we haven't. So we haven't actually told Angular what its scope is on the page yet. So we've got two things we need to do. We're going to put this in here, and that's still not working. So we got to put this up here.
Matt, what's best practices where to put the NG controller?
Like where should it live?
Yeah.
Boom! Hey, look at that. It's working. In terms of okay.
You just put it in the div that held the section. Yeah.
Here's my advice on NG controllers and the way that your controller should be framed up. We're kind of like going off track, but we should, because that's a more advanced question. If you guys are ready for that, let's do it. So here's the thing. You need to think about how your application is going to break down, what areas you're going to think about them, or sorry, you're going to use your routes as a way to frame up the different sections of your application. So you kind of need to think about what parts of your application are going to change dynamically based on the URL. And normally the result is going to be that you're going to have one application-wide controller. That's one controller that you can use to manage via a model, not directly, your application state as a whole. And that could be like on your, I mean, I'd normally put it on this app container thing. I usually use that as like my go-to, so I'd have like ng controller equals like, and I usually do it based on that, so I'd have talk track control or something along those lines. So that's kind of the best practice there. And then in terms of like now you're talking sub-components, and they're smaller pieces of your page. So maybe you've got navigation or something. Maybe you're looking at Gmail and you've got, you know, like a list of, you've got your inbox in the middle and you've got like labels and stuff over on the left. You kind of want to think of your controllers as the smallest possible region they can consume in the DOM. So they should have control over very small, very specific parts. And it's better to have lots of small controllers that are very relevant to the component than like 3 or 4 controllers that are chock to the brim with all of your business logic. So think of it more in terms of, like this actually, the application structure here really helps because you should be thinking of your controllers in terms of your components. This component needs a controller. What part of the, and that controller shouldn't even live on that element, it should live on that route. So here, let's just, we're going totally off course, but it's good. Let's do that. So let's go. Oh, don't go there. All right. So let's let routes. Let's like the new var. We're going to need state provider. We're going to need URL, router, provider, I guess. Might as well have them both. Old new function, state provider. I don't know, something like this. So we'll pretend that we're creating a route for my this talk. And we'll give it a URL. What should we make the URL? Yeah, sure. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but if you don't do, so if you do this, now if somebody goes to this URL, it won't work. So if you do this and they go here, that won't work. If you do this and they go here, it'll work, but it'll accept anything as input. So just FYI. Oh, okay, template URL. Oh God, where are we going to put this? Well, it's going to be in talks. Yeah, we're going to start from scratch. It's going to be in talks. It's going to be Angular and beyond. We've already got the folder there, and we'll call it like def.html. And then this is the one that's really relevant. So this is where we can indicate our controller, so that we're talking about our route in terms of state. So we're no longer thinking of our. This is why UI router is superior. It's superior because it forces you to think about your application as a series of states rather than as routes that just take you to various locations. Because from the perspective of the developer, that's what they are. These are a series of states, and you need to be able to define them as such. And then we need like a default here. Da-da-da. Okay. And this won't work unless we. Oh, here's another little pro tip. Like you can always use, if you want to keep your. You guys have probably seen this. Do you guys do this right now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Where you'll. Yeah. I think that looks gross. I prefer to inject it after the fact. You can just do. I mean, obviously the same end result, survives minification nicely, and just makes it all a whole lot cleaner. And then we can export routes. Done. So this is what hit me.
When you're injecting your roots there, if you're using something different for a different controller, should you just put everything in one inject, or does it make sense to have it separated?
Pretty much all of your various states are going to require the same. You're still going to need that state provider and the URL router provider. Like these dependencies that I'm identifying here aren't relative to my controller. They're relative to this entire routes method.
Right.
Okay, and these are going to be relevant to almost every state that I have. So no, I would say you want to have your routes defined, and it depends on the complexity of your application. If there is a natural point that you can divide it up at, then by all means go for it. Make it more modular. But for the most part, I think you're pretty safe here. Here's kind of what I would say. It's all being bundled up into the same giant freaking JavaScript mess anyway. So it's not like it's really more efficient, or that you're shipping less code to the browser by leaving those things out. So just drop them in there and put them all in one place. It's kind of simpler.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
What's going on here now? Why did this end up here again? This routes folder really wants to be in this talks directory, but it's not going in there. All right. So, okay, how would we actually go about, since we made our routes, we might as well use them for something. So what are we going to do here? Well, we're going to import routes from, what is it, routes. And I'm sure you guys are pretty familiar with this. This is pretty straightforward. This is like a .config step, and we can just pass routes right to this. So those are our routes set up. That'll probably break all the things. Let's see what kind of errors we're getting here. So obviously it doesn't know what provider we're using. Why do you guys think that is? Looking at this, what is like clearly missing from this module definition?
Haven't defined it.
No dependency listed. So new Angular application, cool, nice to have. New Angular application with dependencies, even better to have. So there we are. Now we actually have that route working. So a couple things that you need to think about in terms of how you're modularizing your application. The reason that you define this as a constant is because in your subcomponents, you're probably going to put this in a constants file, and in your subcomponents, you're going to be like talk track plus, I don't know, controller or config. Something along those lines. Actually, sorry, it wouldn't look like that. It would look, well, no, it probably would look like that. And you'd have this as your module definition, and then you would include that as a dependency here. So it'd be like, I'm going to just spell it out, but it'd be like this. And that way you can include all of the dependencies related to a specific module separately. So each of your, I guess where this is going is, I mean, this probably isn't something I would drop in an introduction, but it sounds like you guys were already there. All of your components should be their own modules. And if they are tied, if there's a hard coupling between your component and the application in which it's going to live, then it should be like talktrack.config. I mean, the configuration is not going to be valid without that application in particular. If it's a module that could live outside of that application, then you should move it into a shared library, and you should call it something that isn't related to your module. So you might have like shared stuff. .config. Well, it wouldn't be config, but you get what I'm meaning. Stuff to think about. Okay. Any other questions there?
Yeah, I had one. Can you just kind of circle the wagons here and just explain everything that's on the screen right now?
Oh, you want me to go through and explain all the things on the screen? All the things?
I know, like, I'm just kind of getting a little lost as things move through.
Okay. So let's go top to bottom. Use strict. That just basically says that I care about, I want JavaScript to enforce the harshest rules possible. It works in ES6 just like it did in ES5. These imports are, I'm requiring something from an external module. This reveal is coming in here. That reveal is in a shared component repository, and it just looks like this. And reveal, as I mentioned, that's the library that's powering the slides. So this is that class. And then we have our routes. We kind of just went through and wrote that together. That's here. And that's defining that, just that one route right now, which we're not using yet, which we will. Let's see what happens if we go here. Oops. Should break all the things, but it might not. So I think it's erroring, and it's just redirecting me by default. I bet if I take this off. Oh, I know what's going on. Reveal is, yep. See how like it's on title slide, and if I went to 1, it would like change the slide for me. So that was, there we go. So that's that route. Not a very exciting route at all, but there it is. And just maybe to help you understand this a little bit better, let's State. What is it? State. So let's have a look at state here.
Good.
So this is what state looks like. So you can see we've got these params, and right now there isn't any. So let's look at that params thing for a sec. So right now it's an empty object, and if I put 5 up here, well, it doesn't like me because of the fact that we don't have a deck.html defined. So we're going to do that in just a sec, but we're putting something on scope here, and because it's on scope and it's within this controller, we see that popping up here. So even though everything else is broken, this is still working. This is still being displayed because it's in a controller. It knows where that controller is. It knows where it's defined, and it's got a value. So if we change this to, like, I don't know, something else, you can see that it's updating. So that's Angular's binding at work, data binding at work. And then we attach those routes via the config, which is done before everything else even though it comes last in our definition here, it's actually happening first. So configuration is taking place before all of our controllers, and our Angular app is initiated. Does that, like, top to bottom help?
Yeah, for sure.
Matt,
Okay. Hit me.
for the controller, if I wanted to inject something in, like, say, the state, I wanted to inject it first, would it be controller $ inject, or would it be Angular and beyond $ inject, and then I would put my dependencies in?
So yeah, you would. So I mean, the way that we've got the controller defined here, we're doing it right on Angular, but you would do it exactly like the routes, the same way the routes worked. So you would define it exactly like this. So it would just look like this. So you'd put in your dependencies here. In this case, it's well, why don't we try it? Because it's controller and it's relevant to this. We'll just take this stuff to make our start a little faster. Whoops. And we are using, what are we using here? We're using scope and state, and it's, oops. Probably just take all that stuff. Where did I put it? Does that clear that up for you? And then,
Yes.
like, I'll go right through to the import. So it would be like here we do import controller from, and obviously you should not call it controller. That would be a really silly thing to call it. Talks Angular and Angular and beyond / controller, and then controller would be like done.
Okay, sweet.
That makes sense?
Yes, thank you.
And like normally the best practice, I actually have a really good sample project that includes like a lot of this stuff, but the best practice here is you wouldn't be including this one thing. You'd have like, you know how in Node, if you require a folder, okay, you see how here we require shared reveal, but reveal is like the index.js of that reveal?
Mm-hmm.
So I do something really similar here, yeah, where I pull in each task. This is the way that you would normally do it. You'd go and you'd say like, go and grab me all of the controllers and models for this thing, and you'd register them as like, you know, if it's Angular and beyond, it would be Angular and beyond.controller, Angular and beyond.model. And that way, when you'd import them all to your main app.js folder, all in one bundle, because in ES6 you can do this. Crazy. So you'd include them like this. And this is like the way everybody sort of does this now, is you'd go Angular and beyond. And now you have your controller, your model, and your service, and you'd be like, oh, my controller's going here. And honestly, this, you wouldn't even do like this. You'd be like controller.name.
Okay.
And now you could even iterate through them if you wanted to. You could be like, I want all of my controllers to be registered. I want all of my routes to be registered. But that might be a little overkill. And you'd be like service, and you'd be like service.name, and then your service.
Cool.
So all kinds of, like, you can really, really streamline your, okay, let me, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I am going to check out, where is it? Go to commit. I'm going to check this out because we don't have time to go through everything anymore. Oh, you know what I need to do? I need to wipe my changes out. So let's just delete all this stuff. All right. So that I can show you like stuff put together a little bit more. So, oh, this doesn't have my latest changes. Don't. Oh well, no big deal. But I've got a better example of configuration, like configuration being imported. So again, really simple. Like we export a default object. This one at this point only has one series of configuration. We're using this to configure reveal rather than the way that we used to have it, which is just, we pass it in directly, and you can see that's being registered the same way. So config constant config dash config, common config, and our routes are the same thing. We bring in these external libraries, and kind of the point here is that you don't, like, let's go and look at this reveal module. So this is now a fully blown class, and it's got methods and everything on it. You don't need to make everything an Angular module. If it doesn't have to be an Angular module, if you're not taking advantage of services or any of the providers or the controllers, like if you're not using that functionality, then don't make it an Angular class. Make it totally separate, keep it as a component, import it using regular old Browserify, and just use it inside of the classes. I mean, we already have a good dependency management system. You can see that, like, where did I pull that in? I'm pulling in reveal here. I'm instantiating as a new class. That means you kind of skip all of this stuff. You know it's only ever going to be a singleton. So that's kind of that is honestly the best practice. Don't do anything in Angular that you don't absolutely have to. Any other questions? Because we're out of time, but I'm going to go through the end of my deck anyway. If you guys don't mind bearing with me.
Please.
Yeah. You don't mind.
Okay. So now my deck just won't work anymore. Oh, right, because we defined that route. So like, see how temperamental that is? Backslash, or does it really accept that, but not this? Wow, I don't know what's even going on here. Let's not say that. All right. Speed through, I promise. Okay, pro tips. Maybe I should have started with this. You guys are already pro. Use unidirectional data flow. Like directives should only ever talk to your HTML, should only ever talk to your controller, should only ever talk to your services. That's kind of rule of thumb. Your controller isn't a view, so don't manipulate the DOM inside of your controllers. That's a sure sign that you've gone down the wrong path. If you find yourself using jQuery inside of a controller, if you find yourself directly accessing the DOM for any reason, you know you've probably gone off the rails. There's going to be times where you perform async operations and they just don't seem to work. If this happens, it's because Angular doesn't know about your async operation. It needs to know. So you've got to wrap it in an apply block. So you can see that there's like a apply which is on scope. You access it like this. So if I've got scope here, I would do like, let's pretend I wanted to do it with this, let's pretend this was like a promise or something. I would do .apply. I'd have a function here. I'll do it the old school way so it looks a little bit clearer. It doesn't have 3 Ps. You'd open it up, and now you'd make your change. Anything that happens inside of this, like let's say this is like promise.then do stuff. Anything that happens inside of your scope.apply, Angular will know about, and your view will then reflect those changes. So if you find that you're doing stuff, it doesn't seem to be working, this is probably why. It's because of Angular's hand-waving digest loop, which I would be totally willing to explain offline, but this is one of the solutions. Use UI router. If you don't use anything else, trust me, pain will follow. If you find yourself using lots of watch in controllers, that's probably another sign that you've gone off the rails. If you have to constantly be monitoring an input or something using watch, then something's gone wrong and you should have written a custom directive. Sometimes when you call apply, I probably should have just put this right underneath it. Sometimes when you call apply, you're going to get this error will pop up. Have any of you seen this error yet? Apply already in progress? No, because I just told you about that apply hack. Okay. So when you start using the apply hack, so everything makes it into the DOM and your views are always up to date, and you have control of when they update. So the other cool thing about apply is, let's pretend you want to do like 5 asynchronous operations. First you're going to fetch users, then you're going to fetch those users' tasks. You don't want to have the DOM update both times, you just want to do it in one batch. So you'd wrap that all in an apply. Now occasionally there's already apply in process because maybe the user's clicking on something which is triggering an update to the view. Well, hey guys, just 1 second. I have another meeting. I'm going to tell them I'm going to be just a few minutes late.
Good.
So sometimes that apply is already going to be in progress. I strongly suggest you check out Safe Apply. There's tons of these documents online. There's lots of different ways of implementing it. I usually add it as a utility to all of my Angular projects. There's actually one on NPM already. And basically all it does is it says, hey, is there an apply in progress? If there is, wait till that's done and run apply. If there's not, then run it. Simple as that. So conclusion, wrap it up. Learning Angular, it's not going to just teach you about Angular. It's going to teach you about how to build client-side applications in general. It's going to teach you about the things that you need to watch out for, how you actually take data and wrangle it from an API all the way up into the view in a way that isn't destructive at scale, in a way that you can collaborate with other people, because Angular applications are designed for large teams and large applications running at scale. So it's a great place to come and learn. It has some of the newest and coolest trends, data binding, great tools, it's test-driven, all the stuff I already mentioned. So it's a good place for you to invest some of your time. I mean, as you can see, like we could spend all day. I didn't even get to write this little app, which I'm devastated about. But I mean, it's got tons and tons of moving parts. But all of these moving parts, in and of themselves, are pretty simple, and most of them are implemented the same way with plain old JavaScript. So don't get intimidated. It's easy once you get going. Modern frameworks, they just kick ass. Try them all. Mess around with them. Make sure that you're not so obsessed with the tree that you don't see the forest. There is amazing things happening right now in frameworks, and you'll learn a lot just from understanding how they're doing things differently, and obviously, most importantly, why they're doing things differently. And you may find that Ember is your, I mean, at Heroku, it is so polarizing. Like, there is the React crew, there is the Angular crew. It's like West Side Story. Like, we all get in little knife fights. You know, I'd like to think React, we're feisty, we come out on top sometimes, but Angular's in there too. So there's really exciting things happening, and you just need to make sure you keep your ears open for it. Obviously, this was like a blistering run-through, but I wanted to give you all the resources that I use. I listen to JavaScript Jabber all the time. Great podcast just about JavaScript. It'll keep you on your toes. Egghead is really nice. So, I mean, a lot of the questions that you guys have asked are you're kind of ready for Egghead. Egghead is the place you go when you're like, I don't know how this one thing works. I need to see like a 2-minute video to get me primed up. Batarang is a really nice Chrome add-on that allows you to kind of like dig into your Angular application and kind of see what's happening behind the scenes. ng modules is where all of the Angular modules are registered and listed. Again, I have a preference for things that are on NPM too, but that's just me. The community on AngularJS is huge and really friendly. I think like Go Angular would never have happened without Freenode. Most of the most difficult bugs I encountered were resolved through Freenode. IRC, the AngularJS channel. The ngconf videos are all online. I mentioned those. That's a really good place to find out like what's coming in 2.0. The AngularJS channel has a bunch of introductions and stuff. Actually, I've got a good talk up there about the Angular model and how you tie in real-time frameworks like Facebook to it. And then this is like dated and old because I haven't pushed my new framework that I was going to write during this talk, but I haven't quite finished up yet. But this will be a resource that you can find this deck within the next couple of days. Questions?
Anybody have any questions?
I'll flip on the chat. Oh, I can see you guys now. Hello. I'm gonna stop sharing. Whew. That was a roller coaster, guys. You pressed me hard there. I didn't think they were going to have so many questions. I thought it was going to be like, so what do those brackets do? That's what I was expecting. You guys, I should have. You know what? And honestly, I never know quite what to expect. Like at the software architecture thing, I expected like super technical people, and they were like, "What's MVC?" And I was just like, I just want to throw myself off the stage right now. So.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was fantastic.
I think you guys need like an Angular 201 or like an Angular 301. Maybe that's another day.
Are you cool with us throwing you some questions in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. Shoot me whatever you got.
Okay.
Yep. I'll be hanging out in that UIT room. So yeah, if you have anything or you're curious about it, or I could point you in the direction. We created like a half-day workshop on a lot of these like concepts using the old version of ECMAScript. I think the new version brings a lot to the table, so it's worth checking out. But still, I mean, you can easily translate between the two.
Cool.
Thank you very
Excellent.
much.
Thanks,
man.
Thank you.
Cheers, folks. Good luck. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks for your time.
Well,
That was good. I have a short